Yesterday we had a very rambunctious, you might say, debate yesterday about the meaning of the law when it comes to contempt of court, what you can say, what you can't say. We were able to digest properly what Sir Keir Starmer had said on Tuesday, which was all about his excuses for not releasing any information whatsoever. Rafe Heydel-Mankoo is here, a scholar of many things, and I don't know about you, Rafe, but I mean, I basically managed to get it from Michael Mansfield, a very well-renowned barrister, a man who's been involved in a lot of very high-profile cases over the years. I managed to get from him that Keir Starmer actually could have said an awful lot more legally without in any way jeopardising the court case, and that has been my argument all along. Let's have a look.
Obviously, you can see in this case why there was a problem, because they find Al-Qaeda bomb-making guidance and so on, a book about that. They find ricin. It looks pretty much as though it might be. But it looks, and now, of course, looking back, they're able to say in the context that it was this individual. But that doesn't mean to say he hasn't got a terror-related, because if you possess items that might be of use to a terrorist, then you're guilty of a terrorist-related offence.
Right.
Now, I think Keir was perfectly entitled at the time, if he wanted to say it's potentially related to terrorism,
right,
but I can't give you the details.
Is exactly right, which has been my sort of stated case all along, because for me, Keir Starmer's hiding behind the sort of the legal framework of the word terrorism, which he didn't need to do.
You're precisely right. And this is also what Jonathan Hall, KC, who's the independent reviewer of terrorist legislation, has said the same thing. He said this information should have been revealed to the public. It undermines confidence of the public in these things. And it, of course, leads to people speculating and becoming suspicious about whether or not there was...
And it creates a lack of trust, doesn't it?
It completes a huge lack of trust here. And, you know, the simple thing is, this chap was, you know, found under the charge under the Terrorism Act originally. That should have been made public. Merseyside police, who were criticised, have said, we wanted to come forward with this, but the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, of which Keir Starmer was once head, suppressed this. And what I found really interesting was on the day that he pled guilty, Axel Rudakubana, the BBC came out, and the BBC said, we've never experienced such difficulty trying to get information from public bodies about this. There was clearly an attempt to try to suppress protests by preventing this information from coming out.
By suppressing facts and I think suppressing news. You can't do that.
And I think the Southport case should open discussions on whether we should do away with the Contempt of Court Act 1981 section that says you can't discuss these things for fear of prejudicing the trial.
Absolutely.
Because you don't find this elsewhere in the world.
No,
the Americans don't have this. In fact, in America it's seen as the media holding the courts and the justice system to account.
Absolutely right.
By having full transparency, you'll get wall-to-wall coverage of a trial. You never have trials being struck down for being mistrials in America because of this. In fact, it adds to it. You know, the juries are just told, don't consult the media on all of this. And I think we surely should have more transparency here, because yes, justice for the perpetrator or the accused is one thing, but public faith and public trust must surely be paramount.
Exactly
because it's been undermined so much.
And I imagine you will feel the same way as I do about this. I feel very, very uncomfortable with the authorities, shall we say, telling us that we can't say something, we can't do something, we can't ask questions about things. You know, trust us, leave it to us. I spoke to John Rentoul and Dan Hodges yesterday, both of whom I accused of having gone over to the other side. I said, you guys are journalists. Why on earth would you accept the word of the authorities? Why would you believe the Prime Minister and his government or the CPS? Our job as journalists is to question everything and to ask to make sure that they're doing their jobs properly. And so the idea that we are sort of slowly sleepwalking into this situation where we're being warned off every single legal case that you can't say anything at all because you will prejudice the jury or you will prejudice the trial. It's absolute nonsense in my view.
It is absolute nonsense. And you know, the funny thing is when pre-trials, for example, in America are always public knowledge. In this country, you can't publicise anything about a pre-trial till after the main trial has concluded. Whereas in America, because of First Amendment rights, any attempt not to make this public becomes a story in and of itself.
I worked there for 10 years as a journalist, and I was absolutely staggered and amazed amazed at the amount of information that you could actually gain from just ringing people up. When I was there in the midst of all of the insider trading craziness in the 80s, right, and all the arrests of mafia bosses and all the rest of it, and I could ring up the Southern District Court in Manhattan, speak to the US Attorney. He would tell us what he was up to, tell us who he was targeting. I could ring up the FBI in Miami and find out who they were putting under surveillance because of a takeover bid, which looked as if it might be a bit dodgy. And it's a much healthier democracy for that.
Well, even during the trial, in the UK, all you get is a brief summary by a journalist standing outside the court will summarise. In America, you'll have proper discussion, you'll have experts on there, you'll get opinion pieces being discussed. We need to seriously, and that, of course, is very good in giving the public faith that they know what's going on, nothing's being hidden from them, whereas we here can now see the dangers of all of this. And I'm afraid you're quite right about the people on the press going over to the other side, because yesterday's newspaper headlines about the Amazon killer is complete deflection. It seems as if, you know, you are the fourth estate. Your job is to hold to account our politicians, and yet you're buying in to their attempts at deflecting the story entirely.
Exactly right. And as we can see from the front page of the Mail and the Sun this morning, a terrible tragedy once again. The knife crime problem in Britain continues. A little boy, 12 years of age, stabbed to death walking home from school. Yet another victim of what can only be described as a tidal wave of knife crime now. And I don't wish to be in any way flippant, but I wonder whether Keir Starmer will be as interested in finding out where this particular knife came from. But what I said yesterday is that you can stop knives being sold as long as you want on the internet and having them delivered to your home. People will still take a knife out of a kitchen drawer and stab you with it.
That's precisely
the point.
This is why it's such a ridiculous deflection. Firstly, knives don't kill people. People kill people.
Yes.
And the idea that any teenager doesn't have access to their mother's carving knife or whatever they have for their Sunday roast or whatever. I mean, it's a complete nonsense. It's a huge distraction. Yes, there is a huge issue with knives in this country. I remember being in Great Yarmouth and seeing a shop front full of these machetes openly being advertised for sale. But, you know, if somebody has murderous intent, they are going to commit that, however difficult it is to get hold of a weapon.
Absolutely.
And there's another issue here also I just want to quickly say here, you know, something which no one in the media has discussed. You know, asylum seekers and immigrants who come from troubled backgrounds and war-torn places are far more prone to violence and criminality. And we are not discussing this in this country. The fact that this person, Axel Rudakubana, was born in Wales is irrelevant. Because if you look at the Nottingham murders, if you look at the Sir David Amess's assassination, if you look at the Manchester Arena bombing, you look at this case, these were all the children of asylum seekers. And all the evidence shows that there's a more predisposition to mental health issues and to criminality and to violence. And we are importing to this country a vast number of, a population of ticking time bombs. And it includes all of the illegals coming over on the channel crossings, hundreds of thousands of fit young men of fighting age, many of whom have witnessed, some of them have participated in horrific incidents in their own countries. They're coming here, they're poorly adjusted, they're psychologically disturbed, they will never assimilate into our society, and these are ticking time bombs.
We had this problem, did we not, after the Balkans War as well, where we had an awful lot of people coming to this country from Serbia, from Bosnia. Many of them are still here, and not all of them obviously were you know, damaged, but many of them were. And there was a huge crime wave at one point, and a murderous crime wave committed of crimes committed by people who had seen some horrible things and done some horrible things in a war zone. You know, and it's not surprising. I like you, have read the same studies in which they say things like oftentimes the second generation who maybe are born in this country actually develop a hatred of the country they're in because they develop a fascination for the country their parents left. Well, and they want to go back there and they want to revisit the traumas.
Well, and we know Rudakubana was obsessed by the Rwandan genocide, that his family had fled. Also, now is looking, apparently some of the stuff he was looking on the internet was to deal with slavery and racism and all of that sort of woke ideology about Britain being somehow evil or white people being oppressors and so forth. There's a lot to be said here for having a proper discussion about why we are importing people, many of whom will never be adjusted, who have psychological issues. You know, and that alone, for example, over 1,000 British-born people went off to fight for ISIS, have come back here being psychologically disturbed but brutally hardened by the experiences that they've had overseas.
Yes, it's extraordinary. Yeah, let's just go back to Rudakubana for a moment before that moves us very nicely onto the Telegraph's front page, which says 1 in 12 Londoners is now an illegal migrant. But just one final one on Rudakubana, the Sun, on page 5. Life must mean life. Killer must never be free. This is the parent of one of the Southport stabbing victims saying that Axel Rudakubana should rot in jail after his sentence this morning around about 11 o'clock, which we'll bring to you, of course, live. And, what we don't know, and I suspect they wouldn't be stupid enough to do this, but what we don't know is whether some lawyer will get up and say he should be sentenced as a juvenile because he committed his crime when he was under 18.
Well, he was 13 days shy, 2 weeks shy of turning 18. And that automatically means that he won't get a full life tariff, which means he won't die in prison. We almost know that's going to be the case. He could be there for 40 years, perhaps, but he won't die in prison. And, I'm quite worried about the public's reaction if this person doesn't get.
So you're saying it's definitely the case that he won't get a full life term?
From what I've read and understand, he will not get a full life term, but he maybe decades, but he won't die because it was 2 weeks short. And my view is we need to review this as well.
Yes.
I think judges should be given discretion. If you are 17,
Absolutely.
People are aged at different points. If you're 17 years of age, the judge should have the discretion for that entire year as to whether to try you as an adult or not. And I think in this case, given that we know about his background, what's happened to him, given the fact that he refused to stand up in court, shows no remorse.
Made no plea initially in October.
Yeah, and we know that this guilty plea was done in order to reduce his sentence, because he knew, obviously, it was bound to result in his conviction.
Right. And maybe it was also done, and forgive me for being called a conspiracy theorist, if that's what the Prime Minister would like to call me, perhaps it was also done as a deal so that the court case didn't take place, there was no trial, we didn't hear all the evidence.
Well, you may very well comment on that question. People have wondered about this. Firstly, scheduling it on the same day as the inauguration, suppress media coverage, and then having this very convenient guilty plea, which avoids all of the details coming out. Now, I had hoped that the media would then pick it up, but you haven't seen Newsnight or Panorama doing anything not close to a proper investigation on all this, so who knows, you may well be right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching Sky briefly yesterday afternoon for my sins. I don't know why I put it on, but occasionally I just do it to punish myself, and there's a masochistic, bizarre kind of nature that I've got. And do you know what they were discussing? They were discussing the pardons that were handed out in American sort of political history, going all the way back to sort of the last century. And you're kind of going, is that the best you can do? Is that what you think news is, that people care about in this country? And also how American public polls were going in terms of how much people want Trump to do and whether they actually agree with him about deporting mass numbers of immigrants.
But, this is a hugely important... At what point are the British public going to wake up to this, and the British media going to wake up to this? After the Manchester Arena bombing, we thought we might get action. Nothing was done. After this, you would hope, after all the protests and outrage, you would have thought this would have been a moment for change. But no, everything is just reverting back to the way that it was.
It's another review.
Everything's being forgotten about, and we're going to go just through this cycle again and again. We can't do this. This has been a huge disgrace, and the fact that you had a huge swathe of the British population slandered as being far right and conspiracy theorists, when clearly they were proved right, and they were just outraged at the murder of innocents by the offspring of an asylum seeker. The press have failed in their duty.
And they won't address the problem, which you've just very well explained and articulated, that, 5 of the biggest mass terror events, in recent history have been committed by children of asylum seekers. I mean, that's the big elephant in the room, ladies and gentlemen. Coming up, we'll talk about the Telegraph story. 1 in 12 people in London is now an illegal migrant. Plus, much more besides. This is Talk.